Alrighty. Got everybody coming in now. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's A Month of Service presentation of property taxes, exemptions, and payment options. My name is Nia Murray. I am the programs coordinator with Neighborhood Recovery Community Development Corporation, and we are one of the partners in the A Month of Service collaboration, and we want to welcome you all. But also included in our partnership, we have the Harris Central Appraisal District and the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office, who will be presenting the information for you today about property taxes, exemptions, and payment options. But also included in our partnership, we also have the Earl Carl Institute, Texas Legal Services Center, the Harris County Attorney's Office, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, and Lone Star Legal Aid. And together we make up a month of service. And basically, a month of service is the collaboration of all nine of our organizations coming together on a monthly basis and offering a variety of different workshops, resources, and information to the communities that we all serve relative to asset building, asset protection, the maintaining of generational wealth, and community empowerment. And one of those presentations is the one about the property taxes. So we know that there are a lot of communities that are out there that do not have access to a lot of information, that don't know where to go for available resources and services that are available to them, or just don't know who to reach out to when they have basic questions that could potentially improve the quality of their life, that could help them through some kind of hardship, through some particular legal issue or whatever it is that they may have. So we decided to collaborate several years ago in an effort to reach more people, to create a greater impact, and to get as much information distributed out to the community, accurate and up-to-date information distributed out to the community as we possibly can. We know that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I like to deem those folks as the street committee that kind of give everybody their own input and their interpretation of things and how they work and what happened when they went through their particular situation, not taking into account that uh, the state of Texas has its own set of laws that relates to different things that happen in your community or that happen to you as individuals is not necessarily the same thing that happens to your neighbor or your relative and things like that. So again, we wanted to make sure that we get the most accurate and up-to-date information, and we get professionals in those particular areas to provide information as it relates to you and your community and to our state. So that's a month of service. We want to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us. Um, let's see, we do this presentation every month, and I'm sorry, every other month now, starting this year. We will be hosting every other month, but there are a series of different workshops as it relates to the appraisal district and the tax assessor collector's office as it gets closer to the protest season that they will also have, and Ms. Mabel's going to kind of get into a little bit of that as well for you all to kind of be on the lookout around the community for you to actually go and see them in person if you have more questions or before I misspeak, in person, Ms. Mabel?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So they will be available in person in the coming months to talk about the protest season and what that process is like. But she'll get into more information about that as well. This is your opportunity to ask questions that you may have as it relates to property taxes, payment options, and things of that nature. If you have questions about different exemptions, please feel free to ask those questions. Someone will be monitoring the chat. Well, they're monitoring the chat to answer the questions, but some of those questions I will also ask aloud at the end of the presentation so that everybody can kind of get an idea or feel, because sometimes somebody may ask a question in the chat that's relative to the entire group that someone else may not be thinking about or may want to ask and just don't. So I like to read some of those questions aloud. If you have any specific detailed information or questions about your particular situation, please jot a message in the chat and someone will address that. I won't talk about that aloud as we are on a public platform. We do record this session. We also broadcast live on our social media channels. So we want to try to protect your privacy as best as we possibly can, and don't want your personal detail information kind of getting out there for everybody to to get access to, so to speak. So do keep that in mind as you're asking the questions, to try to keep them as general as you possibly can. Otherwise, if you do have a specific question, please feel free to type it into the chat and someone will let you know how to get in contact with them directly for your specific information. So if you are joining us on our social media channels, please feel free to type your question into the comment section. I'm monitoring those as well. I know that there were a couple of questions that were asked that were emailed to me in advance. So, and I know that those were questions that you guys typically go over throughout your presentation. So I want to make sure that everything does get addressed if you do have questions. So again, I want to thank you guys for joining us. Do note that the information that does get presented here is for educational purposes only. We always have to give the disclaimer that nothing on here is considered legal advice or anything like that. So we just want to make sure that we do get the information out to everyone. With that being said, again, thank you all for joining us. I'll go over some other upcoming activities and events that we've got that are scheduled for later this month or tomorrow. Actually, it's the end of the month already. Oh my God. I was going to say the rest of the month, but that's this week. So so I'll let you know what else we've got coming up this week and what's coming up for March for you guys to participate in as well. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So Shay, will have you introduce yourself first, and Miss Mabel will have you introduce, and then you can introduce Ms. Rodriguez, and we'll get right on into the presentation.
All righty. Perfect. Thank you so much, Nia. As you mentioned before, my name is Shay Pinkowski, and I'm with the Office of Annette Ramirez with the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office. Super excited to be here and answer some questions, along with provide some, general knowledge that might be of assistance to you guys as you navigate your property taxes. As Ms. Nia stated before, please keep your questions as general as possible. She does go over them and tries to, take out the specific details so that it doesn't get leaked onto the internet. You don't want that out there. But of course, our contact information will be at the end. So if you do have a question specific to your circumstances, please hold on to those questions, give our office a call, send us an email, and we'll be able to assist you there. But very excited to be here, very excited to be able to help and share some of that knowledge. But I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Miss Mabel, and she'll be able to get her introduction started.
Thank you, Shay.
Real quick, Miss Mabel, as an FYI, we do tend to have some technical difficulties as this is, the internet and whatever. So Shay is not being antisocial. We always have issues with her camera being on and it lags and all this other kinds of stuff. So please work with us as we're trying to make sure. But Shay is a real person and she is there and typically the camera is on. So just an FYI. But go ahead, Miss Mabel.
Thank you, Nia. Yeah, hopefully my presentation will actually come up. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mabel Menifee. I'm with Harris Central Appraisal District at HCAT, as we all know. And I'm also here today with my colleague and team member, Anna Rodriguez, who is a customer resolution specialist. She will be answering questions in the chat, and quite possibly you may be hearing from her as we open up the questions later on for audio. But this is Anna's first time participating with us. So welcome, Anna, to the team, to the AMOS team.
So I'm excited to be here.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to go ahead and get started with our part of the presentation today. We do these with the tax office because our roles are symbiotic in that, we handle a certain piece of it in terms of valuing property and administering the exemptions and making sure that we certify the appraisal rolls so that the tax jurisdictions can then go ahead and set their budgets and calculate their rates. And then once we do that, of course, the tax office then provides does the calculations and sends out the tax bills and handles the collections and payments process. But we each have a wealth of information that's important for property owners to know, or at least to know where to go and ask certain questions. So what we try to do here with our monthly, now bi-monthly presentations is to try to chop up a lot of this information into kind of bite-sized pieces so that folks listening can understand, or at least understand or know what questions they need to ask. And I say that because this, I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's a copy of the Texas tax code. So one person is not going to be the expert in all of this. So we have information, we will try to, sometimes we may have the answer, and we will try to get that information for you from another content specialist here or at the tax office. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation, and I will, let's see, here we go. There. And all right, and then I'm going to do one more thing, and so that should be up there for you all to see now.
Yes, ma'am.
And there we go. So just quickly, property taxes and exemptions are, of course, are interrelated, and we at the appraisal district are kind of the ground zero for initiating that whole property tax process based on the support that we provide to the taxing jurisdictions. So just kind of a really quick run through for some of you who may be first timers in terms of what the role of an appraisal district is. A central appraisal district, there's one in each and every county in the state, and they are responsible for valuing all of the property in that county, in that particular county, in order to provide a tax roll for the taxing jurisdiction. So what we do is value commercial, residential, agricultural properties, industrial, and business personal property. And the law states that we are required to do that at 100% of market value. And we do that based on January the 1st of each year. What that basically means is that the condition, whatever the condition of your property is around January the 1st, that is what the valuation is based on. We also administer exemptions, a very important part of what we do as well. And then, as again I mentioned, that we certify appraisal rolls, which allow the taxing jurisdictions to then set their tax rates. We also are designed to keep the system fair, and by that I mean previously, about 30, well, probably 50 years ago now, before the appraisal districts were established, each and every taxing jurisdiction, that would be the schools, your county, the city, and other special jurisdictions, did their own appraisals, and they set their own tax rates, and they could vary in many different ways. And so what the law did, what the state did then, was to establish an appraisal district in each and every county to do the appraisals, so that all of the taxing jurisdictions would then have to go by one appraisal roll as opposed to different ones, and you can imagine how wildly they could differ. So each appraisal district is also overseen by a local 9-member administrative board, and our chief appraiser is the head man in charge. He's kind of like the CEO of the organization, and he is also appointed by the board. Just quickly, one of the reasons property taxes plays a little bit of an outsized role in Texas. A lot of people who move here are surprised to find that out, but they're moving oftentimes from states where there is where they have a state income tax they've been paying. Texas does not have a state income tax, nor, I believe, it has inscribed in the Constitution that we ever will. But that is the reason property taxes in Texas tend to play a more outsized role, because that's what's used to mostly fund taxing units and to provide revenue for schools and all the other services that we expect as citizens in a community, such as street maintenance, police and fire protection, and that sort of thing. The state agency that oversees the CADs is the Texas Comptroller. So a lot of the information that you can get on our website, you can also find in a more generic form on the website of the Texas Comptroller. So before we jump into it, I wanted to kind of explain why a couple of dates are important. Several dates are important. We do appraisals annually. So we have to keep up with a certain deadline in terms of making sure we get that information to the taxing jurisdictions in a timely manner each year so that those bills can go out around November. So January 1st, I mentioned earlier, was the date of appraisal. That's when your value is set based on the condition as of that date. Excuse me, May 15th. Another important day, that's the protest deadline. That is after you receive your valuation notices from HCAD, you have the opportunity to challenge or appeal those. We refer to that mostly as the opportunity to protest. That deadline is usually May 15th based on the schedule of when those go out, which is usually the 1st of April, late March. I will say that if you're anticipating your property value notice, sometimes before you receive it in the mail, it may actually already be posted on our website and you can go out there and look at it. We usually start posting those around mid to the end of March. And then of course we certify those. Oh, by the way, May 15th is the statutory deadline for filing a protest. However, if you receive your value notice after April the 15th or 16th, you always have 30 days from that date of notice to file a protest, whichever comes later. And then, of course, in October, once the taxing jurisdictions have gotten everything they need from us in order to set their tax bills and figure out how the revenue is going to meet their budgets, the tax bills are mailed out by the tax assessor collectors. It's important to notice that in Harris County, the billing and collection is handled by the tax assessors and not by HCAD. We have a lot of people who tend to think that they are paying. Believe it or not, at least several people each year show up at HCAD to pay their tax bills. We do not collect the taxes, nor do we set the tax rates. But however, for those folks who have not paid their taxes by February 1st, they become delinquent. Shay, my colleague from the tax office, is going to talk a little bit more about that issue when she comes on. And then quickly, just to know that we are required to be at 100% of market value. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The state conducts a biennial market value study of appraisal districts like HCAD to make sure that we are in compliance with that. We recently finished ours, and of course, we did pass with flying colors. And also, just how do we appraise property? Well, we can't go out like a fee appraiser and look at each property because there are 1.9 million parcels in Harris County. So we do it by a process called mass appraisal. And that's something that is used in terms of valuing similar properties in nearby neighborhoods together. That value is derived, it's based on sales, the number of sales and what those properties are selling for in those communities. Again, I mentioned we have more than 1.9 million parcels to appraise each year. And believe it or not, we serve over 500 taxing jurisdictions in Harris County. You're only going to pay to 4 or 5 or so. It just depends on where you live in the county, which ones you're paying to. One of the first things you get, as I mentioned, you're going to be getting in a few weeks is that annual value notice, which is what we send out to begin the process. That basically says what your value is, what your appraised value is, and what your market value is. It's important for you to know the difference in terms of appraised versus market value. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The appraised value is, of course, the number that's used in calculating your tax bills. It's not the market value, it's the appraised value that could be the same as the market value. But if you have homestead exemptions and which includes a 10% appraisal increase cap, it's likely going to be lower, at least for quite a while, unless your value stays the same. And then the market value always tends to be chasing the appraised value. But the appraised value is important because to recognize the difference, because that is what your taxes are based on. The market value is what HCAD determines a property would sell for to a willing buyer on the open market. And that our primary role is to establish that annual market value. A quick note to remember, when you do decide, we're going to briefly discuss protests a little bit, and then I'm going to tell you some information about where you can get more information about the protest process. But it's important to realize that protests are based on the market value and not the appraised value. So just quickly to run over what types of protests, what options you have in terms of protesting your values. We have opportunity, you can do so online, never leave your house, by using something called iFile. And you also can opt for iSettle in lieu of the informal hearing. However, you have the option to do iFile. You can also do what's called an informal hearing, which can be done where you would meet with an HCAD appraiser. You all would discuss it and discuss the issues. You would provide additional information, hopefully, and they will, and hopefully you can come to some sort of agreement. Then, of course, if the informal does not work, you would be scheduled for and you're not ready to accept an offer from an informal hearing, you'll be scheduled for the formal hearing with a group called the Appraisal Review Board. These are folks who are basically volunteered to participate on this review board, and they hear your protest. They hear HCAD's side of it, and they hear your side of it, and they're the ones who make a decision. Almost like a jury of your peers. And most of these folks are your peers, as they live in Harris County and are property owners for the most part. If the formal doesn't work, you can always pursue additional methods, the most popular one being arbitration. As I mentioned before, I didn't want to get into a lot of this because beginning next month, which we do annually, we provide throughout the county a series of me. You're going to have a senior appraiser or analyst who knows their stuff, who does it every day, to be the ones to provide you with that information in person or online workshops. And we do that prior to the May 15th protest deadline, because as people get those valuation notices in the mail and open those up, that's when their interest is really piqued in this process. So our folks take the time away from what they're doing in the appraiser in our residential property division and our exemptions division and customer service to actually come out into the community to do those. That workshop schedule, we're currently finalizing it, and it will be posted on the AMOS, our website, as well as the tax office's websites. And I've actually added those email addresses where you can go and check out that schedule if you would like to attend one. They're typically anywhere from 15 to 20 of those held throughout the county at different times of the day. So let's talk a little bit about exemptions, because there's a deadline coming up for those as well in terms of filing them. The soft deadline for exemptions is going to be April 31st for anyone who needs to either apply for the exemptions or make changes. But what are they? Most of probably a lot of you know what they are, but in many cases, you may be a new homeowner. You may be planning to purchase a home out there. So they they reduce or eliminate some of the property tax for eligible property owners. These are administered by HCAD, and these are what are used by the taxing authorities to calculate your property bill. So let's dive a little bit into those. As I said before, they exclude part of your property from taxation by reducing that appraised value before the tax rates are actually calculated. Most common ones that we talk about are going to be the general resident homestead exemption. If you own and occupy a property, it's in your name, you should, by all means, by now have a homestead exemption. There's also the over 65 exemption, which is in addition to the general resident homestead exemption. You've met those qualifications once you turn 65, and you most likely will be able to meet the qualifications for the additional over 65 exemption. There's an over 55 surviving spouse exemption. We'll talk about that in a minute. A disability exemption, and there are several exemptions that disabled veterans may apply for, as well as some other service-related exemptions for individuals who or families, survivors who may have a family member who was killed in the line of duty, say as a first responder. The general resident homestead exemption, how do you get it? Very easy. If you own and occupy that home as your primary residence, you simply fill out the application that HCAD provides. It's online, or you can pick up a paper one. And again, as I mentioned before, there's a more generic one out on the Texas Comptroller's website that we also accept. Simply fill that out, provide that proof of ownership, and 2 steps in that, so that your application isn't delayed. You also have to provide a copy of your driver's license. And if there are 2 people on the deed, a copy, or we need a copy of both. And the driver's license, the address on that needs to match that of the property that you're applying for, the exemption for. So what does it do? Once you get it, it provides that 10% appraisal increase cap. And I see I have a slide here that I haven't updated yet, but it says here $100,000 school tax exemption by state law. That is actually now 100 and, is that 40 or 50? 40,000, right? Right, Anna? $140,000 school exemption, because you guys voted to increase that through a state referendum in last November. So that was applicable for the previous 2025 tax year, and it is also applicable for 2026. Now, depending on where you live, there may be other exemptions that are offered by various jurisdictions. The city of Houston offers a generous tax exemption for both the general resident homestead exemption and some additional exemption amounts and an increase in that exemption amount if you're over 65. So does the county, and there's some special districts that offer exemptions. It really depends at that point on where you live in the county and which taxing jurisdictions you are under. I did mention there were 500 in Harris County, actually over 500 now. So so again, that shows you that it can vary, but the school tax exemption is one that is required by law. So over 65 and disability exemptions, as I mentioned before, that's in addition to the other ones. You qualify for it the entire year that you turn 65, although the exemption department wants you to wait until you're within a few weeks of that birthday before you file, because they want to make sure all that information is current. And then there's the disability exemption, which is similar, pretty much the same. There's some slight differences, but the disability or the over 65 exemption are pretty much the same. Now, it's important to know that you can only have one or the other. The disability exemption is for folks that become eligible to receive disability benefits under the Federal Old Age Survivors or Disability Insurance Act. And in some cases, people may not be receiving Social Security, but that are disabled, so they can also provide a physician statement, have a physician provide a statement to HCAD. That statement, that form for the physician to fill out, is also on our website. So what are the additional benefits of having that over 65 and disability exemption? Number one, your school taxes freeze at that amount for that year. They'll never go up, or they can go down if the value of the property does fall, but they can never go up unless a couple of things happen. One is that you add some additional value to the property, like you build a new room, or you add you build a swimming pool, or tennis courts in your backyard, which things like that do add to your value. So what happens then is that tax ceiling is going to be recalculated on a percentage amount and then set again, but you have added additional value that way. You're also eligible for a tax deferral, and you can pay taxes in installments without penalties down at the tax office, and Shay's going to talk a little bit about that. And then again, depending on where you live, there may be other exemptions that other jurisdictions provide to spice up that over 65 exemption. The over 55 simply means that if your spouse died in a year in which they were qualified for the over 65 or the disability exemption, then as long as you're at least 55 years of age or older on the date of their passing, you are eligible for the over 65 exemption as well. You'll get all of those benefits. As I mentioned, like for instance, the school tax ceiling and the tax deferral. And again, paying your taxes in installments without penalties. Quickly, for those of you who may be who are listening in because you're in the process of purchasing a home or considering that, there is something now called an immediate resident homestead exemption. Remember, I mentioned to you that January the 1st is kind of the date when the clock restarts in terms of HCAD's valuations and things. So it used to be that if you bought a home in May or June, you weren't really eligible to even apply for the exemption until that following January, at first of the year passed. You can now qualify for the immediate resident homestead exemption upon moving in and occupying your home. And then you get what's called a prorated exemption. So if you moved in 1st of April, then you could conceivably get an exemption for 9 months of those 12. However, if the previous owner, and that mainly applies to properties where the previous home did not have exemptions or was never occupied. So especially new builds or homes that may have one time been rentals before you purchased it are eligible. However, if the previous homeowner did have the exemptions, then most likely you are going to be able to benefit from those exemptions for the rest of the year. So it's a really good deal if, say, for instance, you move into a home that was previously occupied by folks who were over 65 and had held that exemption for a number of years. But the second year is when you get the full exemption. And keep in mind that establishes your cap eligibility rate base year. So it's that new exemption is going to be based on the purchase price, the valuation of your home, minus the exemptions you may have benefited from that first year. Now I want to talk a little bit about something called an heirship exemption. Because there may be a lot of folks out there who are trying to figure out what their tax liabilities may be in properties that they inherit. Shay is also going to go down that road, but I want to mention that one of the most important exemptions for folks in terms of inheriting property and actually living in that property if they're heirs is the heirship exemption that you want to definitely pursue. So what is the home still in a deceased relative's name, first of all? Well, are you living on or do you have interest in the heir's property? So it's basically that land or homes that have been passed down through generations, and there's no clear or updated title to that. That usually happens because a lot of parents and don't want to distinguish between who they want to leave the property to. And so what happens is it's left then to multiple heirs and they share ownership. Previously, it was pretty hard for a property to get 100% exemption, or the person living in there to get that 100% exemption when they had multiple owners. If there might have been 4, then they were only able to get 25% of the exemption that they would have been able to get if they were 100%, if they had 100% ownership interest. There is a process that will allow the person living in the home to get that 100% exemption, and but without affecting any ownership rights of the other heirs. It does take a few steps, but it certainly is helpful for folks who are trying to take care of that property and actually ultimately keep it in the family. So when you if you're filling out our exemption application, there's a special section on section 3 of that application, which kind of triggers the process. If you answer yes to a couple of questions, it triggers that process of your application being that for an heirship exemption. And it tells you some of the information that you're going to need in order to do that. Do other heirs own the property? You will need an affidavit establishing your ownership interest in the property. Also need a death certificate of the previous owner. We also need a copy of the most recent utility bill, and that's simply to prove that the property is actually being occupied. And then any kind of citations of any court records relating to your ownership interest in the property. Now, if you have any specific questions or any questions at all about that, I do recommend that you call our exemptions department or email our e-bank folks, because they are more than willing to help you with that process if they can. So please keep that in mind. And in some cases, those of you out there listening now may know some folks who might be in this situation. Please pass this information along to them, because that's one of the leading reasons, heirship issues, one of the leading reasons people lose their property interest and basically a family's generational wealth at times because this can happen. Also, finally, I want to just point out some veterans exemptions that are available. There's a total exemption for veterans that have been disabled veteran surviving spouse exemption. There are percentages of veterans exemptions for the disabled. Again, a surviving spouse veterans disability transfer, and a veteran survivors exemption. Some of these if you want to check out further, again, you feel free to call HCAD. We have a specific team dedicated to answering questions about veterans benefits. So quickly, it's just how do you apply? Just want to follow up with, again, there's the paper form, there's the online form, there's a mobile app for some of those that you can actually just download the HCAD app and send it in, particularly when you're applying for that over 65 exemption. I did that recently, and I was surprised at just how easy it was to do. Depending on when submitting if you don't include everything that you're asked to include at first, you can delay. It may take longer, the process. So try to submit everything that the application suggests you do. right at first, because there's going to be a lag time if you're missing something and getting a letter from us saying what we need and the process and all that. So be sure to read that carefully and make sure you're submitting everything. Once it's applied, and approved, you will receive a notification from HCAT that it is on your account. Also, if you have any questions about how to fill out that form, there's a nifty little how-to video available in the form section. You can actually follow it along as you fill out the form. There are also on our website a number of other helpful videos and information that's available. Just quickly mention it, be wary, kind of a lot of companies will send you information if you haven't filed your homestead, saying they can do it for you for a fee. There's absolutely no fee required for filling out and getting your homestead exemption. That is free to each and every property owner. Quickly, sometimes you're not sure what the exemption status is with the property. You can do two things. One is that you can go out on our website and go to the property search, pull up your property, and it's going to say in the left-hand column under exemptions, whether you have a residential homestead exemption. If you're trying to determine if you have the over 65 or some other type of exemption, it's going to say multiple as opposed to listing those exemptions, because as we've been talking earlier in the presentation, we don't want to give out that kind of personal information that there's a over 65 person or a disabled person living in the home. But if it says multiple, you know that that additional exemption has been applied to the account. And then finally, this is another way that you can confirm your exemptions. It's a little postcard that we send out usually around the end of December, 1st of January, and it confirms the exemptions that are currently on the account. You can take a quick look at it, and it tells you what you have. If something has changed, you will need to notify HCAT of the changes so that those can be applied to your account, so that you aren't facing the possibility of owing any back taxes because information was wrong on there and had been that way for several years. So just double check that. Just look at it. Everything's fine. Throw it in the drawer. If not, give HCAT a call. If you do not receive it, that's another reason to give us a call, because the post office does not forward those, and there could have been something going on with the post office where you just simply did not get your card. They're not forwarded, as I said, so they come back to HCAT, in which case we launch an investigation to determine if that person is still in the home. If we're unable to determine it one way or the other, that exemption will fall off, and you would have to reapply for them. This is a copy of our website at www.hcat.org. I mentioned to you in that little second blue line up here that property search is where you can go and check out whether your exemptions are currently on your account. The forms there are all kinds of forms that you may need to apply, especially the exemptions form and a number of protest form, a number of others. Under help, there are a number of helpful videos on several topics on a number of topics actually, that you can go in and listen to, and all of which are under 4 or 5 minutes. You can also make an appointment if you want to come out to HCAT, or just simply come out. You don't have to have an appointment, but it may, in certain times of the year, it may speed things up for you. We also talk about what your protest options are, and a number of other things. As I mentioned earlier, our protest workshop will also be featured on our website. This is a contact information if you have any additional questions. We're located again on the Northwest Freeway at the Hollister Tidwell exit. You don't have to come out here. If possible, if we can talk with you over the phone, or again, you can email us through our e-bank. And then there's also the online system where you can contact us. So that is my presentation for this afternoon. I appreciate you listening. I hope that you had some questions, or if you don't have any today, we've maybe kind of led you to understand where you can go for answers later. Myself and my colleague Anna will continue to be online and in the chat to answer any that you may have. Now I want to turn it over to the property tax office.
Thank you so much, Miss Mabel. All right, so she's covered a lot of information. You know, a big part of what we get here are questions about exemptions, and, you know, those do affect how much you end up paying in taxes. Now comes the less fun part of explaining how those taxes are calculated, what goes into the process of getting those taxes billed, along with how you can pay for those taxes. So let me go ahead and make sure that this is sharing correctly. So if someone could just confirm that that screen is being shared with my presentation on it.
Yes.
Wonderful. All righty. Well, once more, my name is Shay Pinkowski, and I'm here with the Office of Annette Ramirez, who is the Harris County Tax Assessor, Collector, and Voter Registrar. And as some of you may be aware, we did vote her in last November. So she is our, well, not last November, November prior to that. She's brought in a lot of new ideas, a lot of new information, and new ways of outreach to get a hold of, you know, taxpayers who may not be aware of everything that they can or should be doing. So we're all super excited to have her. So just a bit of information for those of you who have not been aware of the change. But what you may also not be aware of is that the Harris County Tax Office does more than just collect property taxes. We are also the office that handles your vehicle's registration and title transfers. So if you're buying a new vehicle and you need the tags in your name, our office is the one that you would go to in order to get those changed over if you're buying it from an individual person as opposed to a dealership. We're also the office that issues out those registration stickers. So the ones that you get in the mail or the ones that you can renew online, those come from our office. In addition to that, we also handle and maintain the voter roll for registered voters. So for Harris County, if you're registering yourself to vote, normally you would do that through our office. Our office is also the entity responsible for sending out those notifications in the mail and reminding you of your voter status. So all of that, you'll normally see our name there at the top. So if you're not familiar with it, that is something that you would be seeing. I believe I got mine just a couple of weeks ago, actually. So just as an overview, the Harris County Tax Office maintains approximately 1.7 million tax accounts, and those continue to increase. That number keeps getting bigger every year due to a whole lot of different reasons, but partially due to new businesses opening up, more properties being purchased and made and bought and sold. But we do collect for quite a few properties here. And we collect more than $8 billion in property taxes. Now, those property taxes don't stay here. What we do is we disperse those tax dollars to the jurisdictions that are that we are taxed on as a community. So that includes the Harris County, your Houston ISD, property taxes, City of Houston, along with your Harris County flood control, as well as a large list of mud districts, utility districts that you would pay for, like your water and your sewage, along with emergency services districts like your fire and health emergency service vehicles. And that maintenance is also paid out through your property taxes. So there have been quite a few property tax law changes in the past couple of years. Most of them have been made in the efforts of reducing how much our property tax payers pay in property tax. So they've increased the general homestead for schools, as Ms. Mabel mentioned earlier, from $100,000 to $140,000 for your school jurisdictions. In addition to increasing the exemption for over 65 and disabled homestead exemption owners from $10,000 to $60,000. Exemption qualifications have changed. So prior to that, Ms. Mabel already has gone over this, but prior to this, property owners who were paying property taxes for the first time, and they were living and owning and residing that home a couple of years back, did not have the opportunity to have the homestead exemption for the first partial year in which they resided in that home. They would have to wait for the first full year to apply, and that's no longer the case. So if you're a new homeowner and you're moving into the property mid-year or later than January 1st, you can still apply for your homestead exemption and have it for a prorated amount during that tax year. So that's also a really big help that's assisted a lot of folks in reducing their property tax amounts due. So calculating your tax bill is something that we as an office take care of, and we do this by using this calculation, which is the taxable value that's provided to us by the appraisal district, and that includes reducing it by any exemptions that are applicable to your property, any caps that might be on there if you've owned your home and lived and resided with that homestead exemption for multiple years. That taxable value is multiplied by the tax rate, which is determined individually by every jurisdiction that collects for your property taxes. So you'll have a nice little list on our statement because we collect for so many jurisdictions. Most folks will get a list of jurisdictions that are collecting property taxes on their account, along with whatever their tax rate is, the amount that you are being taxed on, so your taxable value, and that's how we determine the actual amount that you would pay on your property taxes. So whenever you're seeing our statement go out to you in the mail or you're checking online, you'll typically see a list of jurisdictions, which will tell you who you're paying to, how much you're paying to, and what exemptions you're qualifying for each particular jurisdiction. So in addition to seeing that nice little itemized list on your statement, you'll also receive at the bottom of it something we like to refer to as a coupon. And this coupon states the facts of your property, so it'll give us the account number along with messages to the taxpayer if anything is applicable to you, the return address as to where this statement is mailable to, and your property tax information, so your mailing address and the information on your property. So that bottom statement there is what you would submit in with your payment if you were to come into an office, or if you would prefer to mail in your payment, you can submit this in with your mailed check, of course. But this helps a lot of folks just to kind of keep track of what it is that they're paying and where, and in order to kind of keep your records solid, you would have that top portion of the tax bill to keep for yourself. Homestead exemptions. So Ms. Mabel did a really great job of explaining this earlier, but it is something that we do receive a lot of questions on, so we like to kind of just double down a little bit and make sure everyone's aware. But your homestead exemption and veterans exemptions, disabled veterans exemptions, and over 65 exemptions are all used to reduce how much you pay in your taxes. So for example, on a property with an appraised value of $400,000, tax bill would typically be, if you did not have any kind of exemptions, somewhere in the realm of $8,500. Now, with your homestead exemption, just the homestead, that gets reduced. So instead of paying a bill looking closer to $8,500, you would pay closer to $5,500, so $5,583. And of course, with homestead and over 65, that gets even further reduced. So originally you were paying a bill without any exemptions of $8,500. With the homestead and over 65 exemption, you could see a savings up to, $6,984. So you would receive a bill for $1,516, just dependent on, of course, which jurisdictions are collecting on your property, along with, further information on where you're located, how many other collectors you have, and whether you're paying school to a different district. But, just to give a general idea of how distinct the difference is between a property that has no exemptions versus a property that has all of the applicable exemptions on there, you can really start to see a difference. Now, Ms. Mabel touched on this as well earlier, but something that is also in place to assist our folks who are homeowners over the age of 65 or disabled veterans is something called a tax ceiling. You might have heard of it referred to as a tax freeze. And what the tax ceiling and tax freeze does is it limits the increase of your taxes that you pay towards your school. And some other taxing jurisdictions also have a tax ceiling, but just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, it's not applied across the board. It's not applied to all of your property taxes, but it is applied to your school. And essentially what this does is it caps the amount that that you would be paying to your school tax. For example, if you were to have the over 65 exemption placed onto your property in homestead, and the property taxes due to your school would be $500 the first year in which you had that over 65 applied to your exemptions. The following year, if the value of your property increased, say the surrounding area has gotten more busy, they're building more things around, so it increases the value of your property. And say the calculation normally would refer to the property taxes being due in the amount of like $600. Your taxes for your school would not increase past that $500 that you initially paid. Meaning, although the value would calculate it to be higher, because you have a tax ceiling for that over 65 homestead of yours, that value would not increase past that ceiling amount. So that's what is a pretty big help with folks who are, are staying in that home, who are over the age of 65, disabled or disabled veterans. It does assist in reducing how much you would pay in your property taxes because typically as the city, as the county gets larger and more populated, things are getting built and typically you see an increase in those property tax values. So you would normally see a bit of an increase, but that's what that ceiling is for, is to assist in making sure that property tax that you would normally pay to your school taxes does not increase past that certain point. So long as you don't make any changes to the property itself, such as, adding a pool or adding square footage to your property and things like that of that nature. Another thing that is in the system to assist our homeowners over the age of 65, homeowners who are disabled or homeowners who are disabled veterans, is something called a tax deferral. Now, a tax deferral is a postponement of payment, meaning that although the property taxes are still due, you are given additional time without limitations so long as you are living and residing in that property and you own that property. It accrues at a 5% interest per year. And unlike a homestead exemption, which just reduces your taxes, the deferrals reduce how much interest you pay per year, but it can go away, meaning whenever you sell the property, if you hand it down to the next person, one of your heirs, for instance, any property taxes that are owed at this point in time when you have the deferral, so say you had a deferral on your property for 10 years, and then you decide that you're going to downsize. So instead of selling the property, you gift it to, one of your children. And from the moment that you move out of that property, the deferral can be removed from the property itself. Any taxes that you owed that you had not paid during that time that the property taxes were deferred would then be the responsibility of the next owner. So typically we see a lot of this in folks who are, over the age of 65 and unfortunately they pass away. And, the children or the heirs are not aware of the fact that these property taxes were deferred. So whenever they see the statement, after the 181 days of that that deferral being removed, they're very surprised. They see a bill with a statement of, much more than what they were anticipating. And that is because when the deferral gets removed, we send a notice out that the deferral is being removed. And from that notice date, you have 181 days to pay with that 5% interest per year, after which penalty and interest would become accrued at the normal rate as it normally would have, based on the date of which that deferral started. So it's always really important to make sure that if you are planning on passing your property down to someone after your passing, if you're making your plans for your heirs, that you are aware that any taxes that are unpaid meaning that any taxes that are owed or being postponed with this deferral would be the responsibility of your heirs. So it's good to make sure that everyone is informed, because it's always better to pay with as little penalty and interest as possible, as opposed to waiting until, that is no longer the case, and, the numbers can get pretty outrageous depending on how long those deferrals are on there. So it's always good to make sure that everyone's aware of that situation if that's the case for you. This is applicable through the Harris Central Appraisal District. So if you would like to apply for that deferral, it is a really good protection for folks who are over the age of 65. If you're living on a fixed income, if you're uncertain about the future, it is a really good protection just in case, my memory fails me pretty regularly. So, for instance, if I were to forget my property taxes, and if I were over the age of 65 and had this deferral, it protects me from foreclosure action. It protects me from attorney's fees, and additional fees that would have been assessed, not including the 5% interest fee per year. So it is a really good protection. It allows me time. It allows the homeowner time in which to pay at a slower rate, as opposed to having to pay everything by the end of January. But it is applicable through the Harris Central Appraisal District, and as I mentioned earlier, this is applicable for homestead properties, for those who have the over 65 exemption, are disabled, or are a disabled veteran. I do like to mention this as an important note here. If you are thinking of applying for your deferral, but you are still making payments through a bank for the property. So if you have a mortgage, if you've taken out a second mortgage, everyone's financial situation is a bit different, but it's important to note that if you do have a mortgage company, that you are to let them know prior to submitting in your request for that property tax to be deferred, because when you do, as they have an interest in your property because you have a mortgage, they may not allow you to have a deferral, or if they do allow you to have the deferral, they may still collect your property taxes through an escrow. So it's important to have that communication over with your bank whenever you're going through that process. Another option for our folks who are over the age of 65, disabled homeowners or disabled veterans with a homestead property, is something called a quarterly payment plan. Now, this payment plan is a bit different from our usual agreements, but in the way that there's no interest, there's no penalty, so long as you're making your payments timely. And this is 4 equal payments. We would essentially just take your total levy and divide it by 4, and each one of those quarter payments would be due at the end of January, like normal, at the end of March, at the end of May, and at the end of July. And you do have to have the exemptions applied to your account in order to have this quarterly payment plan applicable to you. But it's also a really great help, again, for those who might have a fixed income, or who are, retired, whatever the case may be, or if you just need additional time or would like additional time to pay off your property taxes. This is a really great option for those folks who are applicable to this. As, once more, there's no penalty and interest fees if all of these are applicable to you and you're making these payments timely. So it's always a good option to have. So for folks who are not over the age of 65, disabled or disabled veterans, but you do have a homestead, or you have a property that you're paying taxes to, such as like a vacant lot, we do still offer payment plans, installment payment agreements for these properties. And this is a financial planning tool. So essentially, when you're paying your property taxes, we can create an agreement for you within 12 to 36 months of length. You can pay them off early to avoid additional fees or to avoid further fees. But these payment plans assist in avoiding collection efforts, avoiding foreclosure actions, again, so long as you're making those monthly payments timely. And we can begin these as early as February 1st. So we've had a lot of foot traffic in our office requesting for these payment agreements as of recent, just because, like Ms. Mabel mentioned before, property taxes were due at the end of January for most folks, so long as they were certified timely. So we're getting a lot of foot traffic of folks requesting for these payment agreements to be applied. You do need to contact our office in order to request for these payment agreements to be applied. You can go through our website as well. But if you would like to speak to someone about this, I'll have my contact information up at the end, and you can reach out to us in order to get that set up for yourself. So a bit further detail. I did mention that this is for those who have just the homestead or no exemptions whatsoever. So for homesteads, the main difference being is that when you have a homestead on your property, the terms are a bit different. Instead of paying the usual accrued penalty and interest, you would accrue a 1% interest per month plus the initial penalty month in which you created your account, in which you created this payment agreement. So for instance, we're currently in February, so you would accrue the penalty for February, which is 7%, and then it's a 1% interest per month when you're making these payments per payment agreement. These penalties and interest are pre-calculated whenever you create your agreement. So whenever you contact us and request for this payment agreement, whenever you're making those payments at the end of the month, you'll want to make sure that you're making exactly that amount in order to finish your payment agreement off timely and as per the agreement. For those who are not in a homesteaded property, you may just own a vacant lot somewhere or a property that you rent out to someone else and you're not residing in that property. We also offer payment plans for non-residents, business and commercial, or personal property. These can be done in 12-month increments, so you would be able to do a payment agreement for 12 months. You still would pay with penalty and interest as normal. But again, those payments agreements would be with the calculated amount of penalty and interest. So long as you're making those payments timely and regularly, there won't be any additional fees that you aren't expecting. So it'll all be included in that payment agreement. And once more, for both property payment agreements, the payments are due at the end of each month. We have quite a few payment options available, including making payments online, by mail, over the phone through our IVR system, or in person. So online, we have our website there, which is www.myharriscountytax.net. You're able to create an account in which you would keep your property records. So if you're one of those folks that has multiple properties or several lots or business and personal property, this is something that we see a lot of, but it's very helpful for making sure that you're maintaining your records on all of your property taxes, and you can pay them all in the same place. So it's very convenient for that sort of process for a lot of our folks. And you can pay online through either your card information, so debit or credit cards, which do incur a fee of 2.4% of the total amount being paid. Or if you'd prefer, you can put in your information from your bank directly. So it would be your routing, your checking number, and they would be able to take your payment through something called an e-check, which is an electronic check. And those have a 50-cent fee as opposed to 2.4% of the total amount that you're making that payment for. If you plan on mailing in your payment, we do recommend that you do not send us cash in the mail. We do see a lot of mail being stolen. Unfortunately, my department hears the worst of the situations that could happen. So please don't send your check, or please don't send your cash in the mail. It's just not a safe process to do. If you plan on paying in cash, our offices are available, and we have about 15 different locations scattered through Harris County that are more than happy to assist you in taking that payment and getting you a receipt. But if you're planning on mailing your payment, we can receive those cards or that check, cashier's check, or money order through the mail. Just make sure that you include your property tax account number or that coupon, as I mentioned before, along with information as to what you're paying. So if you attach that coupon along with your check, then that goes through very quickly, very easily. All of the information is there and present. Just know that if you're not including that, please make sure that you add the account number or the account number and the tax year to the memo line of your check. Because we do get a lot of those checks that we receive payment for, and it just says, property tax, and we have no idea what that is for. So it delays your process, and just to make sure everything goes smoothly, please include your information with your payment. We also have an IVR system which allows you to make your payments over the phone, and that phone number is 713-274-2273. And you're able to make those payments by phone with a card, debit or credit card. And again, those fees still apply, that 2.4%. So just be aware of that when you're making that payment. And as I mentioned again earlier, we do have 15 branch locations who are available and ready to help you. And you're able to pay in branch with card, cashier's check, money order, cash, whatever your preference is. They're able to assist you in getting that payment taken care of in a branch. So we are here to help. We have our branch offices available to answer questions, along with our email and our phone line as well. We have a QR code there, so if you'd like to reach out to us via social media, if you have any questions, same as here. I would recommend not putting your personal information online and following one of the other methods of communication first. If you have questions, just ensure that you're not putting your personal information out there when it's not necessary. But we are here to help. We're here to assist you. I did see a couple of notifications for questions in the chat, so I'll be checking in on those here in a minute. But that is the end of my presentation. I hope I was able to, if not answer questions, then to be able to give you some information or some insight into something you just weren't aware of. But I will hand it over to Miss Nia now. Thank you so much for your attention, everyone. I appreciate it.
All right. So this is like one of the few very rare times that we've hardly had any questions actually in the chat. Someone did ask the question about the presentation being made available. We do record the session, and we do send out a copy of the recording, the link to watch on Zoom or on the YouTube channel, along with any of the reference materials and the links for different resources that were mentioned throughout the presentation. Those will be made available to everyone to go back to watch again. There were a couple of questions that I wanted to get you guys to clarify that were emailed to me in advance. And I tend to ask this particular question all the time, or ask this particular question every single time, because I wanted to make sure that people are aware of how this thing actually works. As it relates to people buying tax liens, can you explain how it works? Because again, social media, everybody goes to TikTok for all of their latest information, and they think it's gospel. So when you see those companies that say, how do you buy property tax certificates in Texas, and come to our hotel and we'll show you how to buy all of these properties. Can you explain what happens when somebody pays a property tax lien?
So we've seen a lot of folks with this issue, particularly this tax year. I'm not sure what bug is catching on, but they are catching. Let me just state for the record that property taxes are voluntary payments. So whenever you're making a payment for property taxes, whether the house belongs to you or it does not belong to you, paying property taxes does not signify any transfer in ownership. Paying property taxes does not mean that you have a higher standing of ownership for that property. So like if you're paying property taxes and you have several heirs to the same property, the property doesn't go to whoever is paying the most taxes. And same with, if you see delinquent property taxes out there and you're making payments to these delinquent property taxes and you have no interest in this property, meaning that this property does not, the ownership of this property does not adhere to you, you're not purchasing this property, you're not assuming ownership of this property by paying their property taxes. You're just, at this point, you're doing a kind deed because you're helping them avoid, further foreclosure actions and tax sales and things like that, because there's a payment being made, it's a voluntary payment being made, but it does not transfer ownership of the property to you by paying these property taxes or having a property tax certificate stating that you've made these property taxes. It does not transfer ownership. So as I mentioned before, there's been a lot of that going around this year. So just to make sure everyone is aware.
Okay. There were a couple of questions that were sent to me as it relates to inherited property from, when there's multiple siblings, what are their rights? Last Thursday, there was our clearing title for inherited property. What happens when you've got multiple heirs? What happens when you've got siblings? What are your rights? I believe Miss Mabel went over the exemption part or the homestead exemption for an heir for property, can you reiterate that part if you've got siblings or somebody that's staying in a house that's not solely their ownership, how that actually works, Miss Mabel? Is she still there?
Sure. Sure, Nia. So, and, and, Anna, feel free to jump in whenever you feel like I've left an important part out or you want to add something. Um, once, one, in terms of heirship property, the exemptions that I spoke about are for the person who lives, the person who qualified for those exemptions. So it's really, this is where a lot of people get caught up in, oh, I'm gonna move into grandma's house because her taxes are way cheaper. Well, they're cheaper because she qualified for them because she was over 65 or disabled or whatever. Those exemptions belong to her. Once once that person passes away, someone else moves into the home, they are no longer eligible for those exemptions. They have to file for their own. And so what we see a lot of that where people haven't changed, they may not, it may have something to do with not having changed the deed over or, but they can be living in a house for many years without having updated the ownership information. It's important to know that, when that happens, the law allows, for the taxing jurisdictions to go back 5 years to bill you for uh, the property taxes that you weren't paying because you were existing under someone else's exemption. Because what happens is ultimately that that person's demise is going to be found recorded in some types of documents that appraisal districts and taxing jurisdictions keep up with. So that in terms of doing something kind of like on the down low, it's impossible. You will put yourself at risk for paying back taxes as well as penalties and interest for that. So it's important to make sure that in some cases you have to go through that probate process or whatever, or whatever. That's a whole nother workshop in terms of how to protect yourself against that we do, right, Nia?
Right.
But just keep in mind that property taxes, ownership rights, and things is something that definitely needs to be clarified uh, following as soon as possible following the death of the owner.
And as far as the, what your rights are for an heir, I will include a link for that presentation that we did last week for those that may be interested or had some questions about clearing title and what your rights are as the heir and what do you need to do to get the property switched into your name and things of that nature. So all of that information will be included on that recording. But as far as deferred property taxes, deferred versus what's the other one?
There's
Deferred versus the exemptions. That's one of the questions that we also that people kind of get a little bit mixed up on.
right, and we
Defers.
always try to reiterate that fact that we've run across seniors who don't want to apply for their over 65 exemptions because they feel like, well, they get the two are kind of mixed in there together in terms of, well, I don't want that exemption because I don't want my kids to have to pay taxes after I'm gone. Keep in mind the exemption is a discount that you get, and you owe nothing once that exemption is granted. It's the tax deferral that your heirs would owe the taxes on. So making sure that we see a lot of people who haven't applied for it because they get the two things things confused in terms of payment. There is no payment due as long as that person lives in the house and is living off the exemptions for which they qualify for. Only deferred taxes, where they have postponed the payment, are due upon 100, as Shay mentioned, within 100, following 180 days of that person's passing. So those are two distinct benefits that have different requirements. So please keep that in mind.
Okay. Question here. Prior to 1998, property values were a lot less. Individuals with an over 65 exemption and low property values may have zero tax liability. Is this still the same, or is this different from a tax deferral?
Uh, Very much so. In a lot of cases, because values have risen the way they have, individuals that cities may, say for instance, your city and county taxes were, and Shay, you may feel free to jump in here as well, were your value was less than what the exemptions were for that property. As property values have risen, you may no longer, your house may be above that amount now. So you're going to pay, say, for instance, the city of Houston, I believe, or the Harris County has, what is it, Shay, $325,000 exemption for
Yes.
65?
So essentially, it does depend on the value of your property, along with which exemptions are applicable to you. And yes, property taxes values have increased quite a bit. So the properties that used to be, $80,000 properties are now sitting at, $200,000+. So the values increase, our exemptions have increased. I'm not going to say to match it, but they have been increasing as well in order to assist the folks who have those over 65 disabled veterans exemptions placed on. So they do increase along with the property, but you do see a lot of folks who are paying taxes now who have not paid taxes in 10, 15 years. And that is because of the property value changes. Their property is just valued higher than what the exemptions cover. And when that happens, then you can owe a balance, or you can owe an amount for your property taxes, which is very different from the deferral, which postpones property tax payments, but the amounts are still due. So you can have both at the same time. You can, I know a lot of folks who have the over 65 exemption and on their homestead, they have a zero balance due, but they also have a tax deferral, just in case, for the sake of making sure that they're protecting themselves in the future. If you're not used to paying property taxes every year because you had a zero balance due for, 10, 15 years, and then this upcoming year your property is suddenly, several $1,000s more, and it taps over that small little jump between your exemptions and your value, then, it helps with protecting yourself from, possibly getting that large penalty and interest amount that you would normally owe for homestead or non-over 65 disabled properties. But it is a nice little protection. So there are two separate allowances that we have for those folks who are over the age of 65 or have those disabilities listed on their property. So it is different because deferred amounts are still owed amounts versus exempt amounts. You're exempt from paying property taxes on whatever amount that covers. So they're different.
And I would also just reiterate to have the conversations with our older relatives. I'm not going to call them seniors, our older relatives, because a lot of times they still do get confused. A lot of times I've seen where some seniors will think, oh, well, I'm over 65 now. I don't have to pay any taxes because I'm of a certain age or something like that. Or they think because they apply for the exemption that it automatically means that I don't pay property taxes because they haven't paid them in a while, or because the tax values were lower at one point and it doesn't cover the full exemption or what have you. Then have the conversation and make sure that you are aware of what your tax liability is and what exemptions and things are available to you. Check with your mom or your grandparents and those older folks, your neighbors, and just say, hey, you got your tax bill lately? Or hey, don't just throw that valuation notice away. Look at it, pay attention to it. Which brings me to this question, Miss Mabel. If you've got a senior that has a property tax exemption over 65, are they still eligible to protest their property taxes?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, they are eligible to protest. They can still protest their value. Because that's gonna be the market value. The protest will be based on the market value that HCAT establishes each year. So, they would want to do that. They may find it advantageous in order to maybe continue to push back closer to their capped amount. So yes, by more, we see a lot of that each year that that happens.
And when do we get to the point, which workshop? Probably the next one
Yes,
for
the April,
April?
yes.
April, we'll get into the protest. Let's see, is the value of property, is it frozen at the amount when you file the over 65 exemption?
That would be the tax ceiling is for the school taxes are frozen, but the regular taxes, I'm sorry, the tax amounts from other jurisdictions may not necessarily be frozen, but they may offer an additional discount, additional exemption amount to those properties at 65. But no, they continue. Shay might want to add Shay, did I cover that?
So it's at 65, it's what the value is at the time when they turn 65, when they apply for that exemption.
Right. So essentially, the first year that you have the exemption, you set the value for your ceiling. So the year I turned 65, if my property taxes for my school are $500, just my school, remember, it's not all the jurisdictions, but just the school, the amount that the school would collect for me for that year with my over 65 exemption is $500. The following year, if my value increases as values tend to do, normally the calculation would calculate to $600 for my school taxes. Well, because I was over the age of 65 and I have my exemption placed on my property the prior year when it was $500, the value that I would pay on my property taxes for my school is going to be capped at $500. Comparatively, if the value of my property decreases or the exemptions increase to where I would pay less on my property taxes, like my value of the property stays the same, but my exemptions increase because of legislature changes, what have you, and I now pay $400 instead of $500, I would pay the $400 because it is a cap. It is not a freeze, which is why I don't like referring to it as a frozen tax amount, because you're not going to pay $500 regardless. It's just you're paying $500 as a cap. So you can pay under, like the value of your property may equate to you paying a lesser amount than it was on the frozen tax year, but it will not be above. I will not pay more than that capped amount unless I, like I said earlier, make a really big improvement to my house. Like I add a tennis court, or I add a pool, or I add square footage to my property that equates to the value being much more, then that cap does not change. That cap would stay the same.
Okay.
But that first year is...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to repeat that the first year I have my exemption for over 65 on my homestead is the year that determines what my cap is. And then consequent years, that capped amount is the capped amount that I would pay, as long as I don't make any changes or improvements to my home.
Okay. That was what Ms. Rodriguez just said. The school taxes will not be more than the capped amount unless you make improvements to your home.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question in regards to other taxing jurisdictions. And since this cap or this ceiling only applies to the school taxes, if HCAD collects, no, tax office, if you collect tax payments for other taxing jurisdictions,
yes,
do they still need to then reach out individually to other jurisdictions if there is some available cap for other taxing areas, or do you all automatically apply that cap?
So just off the top of my head, there aren't a lot of jurisdictions that offer a tax ceiling or tax freeze, mostly because it is predominantly a school function. It's predominantly based by the school per state law. So the schools offer the cap, and say Harris County collects your property taxes, but you are zoned to Pasadena ISD, just as an example. We do not collect as Harris County. We do not collect for Pasadena ISD. That's collected by, I believe, Anita Henry. So when you're paying property taxes to your school, that bill from Anita Henry is going to be capped at whatever that value that you had the over 65 is at. But say you're also making property tax payments through the Harris County tax office to San Jacinto College, right? Another school district or another school. And San Jacinto, for instance, might have a ceiling. So we would assume the ceiling for San Jacinto, and San Jacinto would be capped, and you'll have a freeze for San Jacinto, but you're not going to have a freeze for all of the Harris County jurisdictions. But you would also have your ceiling for Pasadena because they're collected by two distinct entities.
Okay.
So
I just wanted
you
to
can have
make sure.
multiple. It's just, yeah, you can have multiple, but it's something that is automatically calculated within your bill. It's not something that you have to go and apply separately for. The only thing that you would ever really need to, air quotes, apply for when it comes to tax ceilings is, say you're moving from one property to another and you're over the age of 65, you can request for a tax ceiling certificate. And essentially, like if I move to Fort Bend out of Harris County, I can request for Harris County to provide me with a tax ceiling certificate, and then take that to Fort Bend and say, hey, Fort Bend, this is my capped ceiling from when I moved into the property and had the over 65 exemption placed on it. You know, please calculate my bill to the percentage of whatever that cap is. And then they would calculate whatever their percentage of that is, because not every school calculates the same value. Not every school has the same tax rate, and not every house is worth the same amount. So they have to then go and calculate based on whatever that percentage is.
Okay, which brings me to my next question. Owning multiple properties in different counties, specifically Harris and Brazoria counties. If I have homestead in Brazoria and just open lots in Harris County, are there different tax breaks available for multiple properties?
There aren't tax breaks that I know of that are available for multiple properties, so you don't get, it's not like I hate to use the comparison, it's not like a buy one, get one type of situation. The only exemption that comes to mind that applies to multiple properties is for disabled veterans. And disabled veterans can have their exemption applied to, and please HCAT correct me if I'm wrong, but disabled veterans exemptions can apply to multiple properties, homestead or non, but it's to a much lesser degree than most other exemptions. So it's I think that the highest amount that they would be exempt from is like $12,000.
Okay.
So very big difference. And I'm not getting corrected yet, so I think I still got that one right.
Okay.
Also, something called the circuit breaker, but I'm not sure how much that was instituted for a 3-year period, and the legislature did not act on it last year, so I'm not sure how long it's going to be around. But Shay, you want to talk about that, or all
right, cool.
Okay, those are all the questions I had that were emailed to me. Go back through and just double check. Are there any other questions from any of the participants here? There is I was just looking and kind of off subject, but I really didn't realize how much I talk with my hands. So out of my peripheral, there's a lag or a delay on the YouTube. So all I see is me doing this from the last question that I asked. So please disregard that when you guys are going back and watching the video, if you're looking on YouTube. That looks so crazy to me. It just kind of threw me off. But nonetheless, I don't see any other questions that are here in the chat or emailed or on YouTube. So I believe that is it.
probably change at our next workshop. So hopefully people will continue to tune into the April workshop.
Okay, and the next it's April 1, 2, 3, 4. April 22nd will be the next one. We do these presentations the fourth Wednesday of every other month from 1 to 3. So if you guys have any other questions or if you want more information, then definitely tune back in with us here on April. What did I just say? April the 22nd. And you'll be receiving the notices and everything out about that. I will also, as soon as I receive it, we will post the schedule of other areas or workshops where you guys will be out in the community. So we'll make sure that we get that distributed as well in case there's somebody that doesn't do Zoom or can't join on Zoom that they want to actually show up in person. I will make sure that that information gets distributed out to you guys as well and posted on our social media accounts too. So tomorrow is our the fourth Thursday is our foreclosure prevention series, and with that one we will be having our segment on HOA or our homeownership associations and foreclosure. What are your rights as property owners as it relates to HOA? I believe the next one after that will be property tax foreclosure. We will be talking about that. And then just regular mortgage foreclosure will be the following. So we kind of do those in rotation throughout the year. So join us for that. If you guys have any children, somebody you know that may be interested in home ownership, we have our monthly first-time homebuyer education class that is scheduled for this Saturday. If you, just feel free to go to nrcdc.org to register for that. But again, we do that. That's one of the monthly homebuyer classes that allows a future homeowner to apply for the various down payment assistance programs that are out there. So that is one of the educational requirements to apply for those services is to take a homebuyer education class, and we do offer that class on a monthly basis. So February the 28th will be that class from 9 to 3, and that will be in person only. That will not be Zoom. Yes, and we have next month, NRCDC will be hosting a transfer on death deed clinic. It's a great alternative to protecting your home as an alternative to a will. So we're going to have that information session will be March 11th, and the actual clinic itself where we are offering the executions as well as a brief legal consultation with a licensed attorney, and notary services and filing fees will be covered for those that do income qualify. So we will be paying for all of that, and that information will be included on an email that I send out to you guys too. So if you guys know of anybody that needs to get a TOD done, we encourage you to get a TOD done. Please have them make sure that they register to attend that session. So let's see what else is there. I believe that's it for the month of February. Again, the month is gone already. I will be sending out updates on what we've got, what else is scheduled for the month of March. Otherwise, we'll be back full force come the 1st of April with another a month of service presentations. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. There's a brief survey that pops up. There's a link for a survey that pops up on your screen as soon as we end the meeting. We just ask that you take a couple of minutes to kind of, give us your feedback, let us know how we're doing. Did you receive the information that you intended to receive that, once you registered for this presentation? If there's other resources or services or topics that you all may be interested in that we don't currently offer, we ask for your feedback on that as well so that we can think about, trying to get that scheduled for you or at least put into the rotation in some way, shape, or form. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. I'll be happy to forward along any available resources that I have, or kind of, we're here to help. We're a resource. We are we're here for you guys. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez, for joining us for the first time. We appreciate you being here and answering the questions for us too.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Ms. Shay, Ms. Mabel, once again, on behalf of the A Month of Service collaboration, you all have a wonderful remainder of your day. You all take care of yourselves and you stay safe, and we will see y'all soon.
Yay.
All right. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. All right.